السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أحمده وأصلي على رسوله الكريم خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين. It is the Muharram of 2024. It is that month of the year when, besides so many other events in the history of humanity, we focus on one specific event that shook the foundation of the Muslim community in the 7th and 8th century. We focus on an event that changed the nature of a relationship within the Muslim community forever. That basically linked the entire history of that particular era with the rest of the history of the humanity. In the next 10 days, we are going to discover witnesses for humanity with focus on those individuals and those movements that offered their sacrifices for truth and justice for humanity. Because it is not a call of one faith, one religion, one sect, one ethnicity, one culture. It's a divine call, a sacred divine responsibility and duty for those human beings that claim that they believe in the oneness of God and they believe in the oneness of humanity. And in that respect, we go back as Muslims to our original source of guidance, which we call the Quran, which testifies and which verifies and which consolidates the revelation and the guidance that have been given to humanity from the very beginning, emphasizing that standing up for truth and justice is an essential responsibilities of those people who claim that they are the worshipper of God or they believe in the divine guidance and divine message. The Quran offers some 66 verses spread throughout those 6,632 verses describing how and in what manner that a struggle has to be led, that sacrifice has to be offered, how the truth and justice has to be fought for. But one key ayah of the Quran that has echoed throughout human century history is found in chapter 4, verse 75 of Surah An-Nisa, where clearly it is mentioned, وَمَا لَكُمْ لَا تُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَالْمُسْتَضْعَفِينَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَالْوِلْدَانِ الَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا أَخْرِجْنَا مِنْ هَذِهِ الْقَرْيَةِ الظَّالِمِ أَهْلُهَا وَاجْعَل لَّنَا مِن لَّدُنكَ وَلِيًّا وَاجْعَل لَّنَا مِن لَّدُنكَ نَصِيرًا. Which means, how could you refuse to stand and struggle in the cause of God? And what is that cause of God? That you stand for the utterly helpless men, women, and children who are crying and who are saying, "O our sustainer, lead us forth to freedom out of this land, those whose people are oppressors, and raise for us out of thy grace a protector and a supporter." This is a call that we has echoed throughout human history. There have been individuals, you may call it Christians, you may call them Jews, you may call them Hindus, you may call them Buddhist, whatever you want to call them. But one thing which distinguishes them is that their passion for truth and justice, because they believe that without truth or justice, the cause of God is incomplete. We talk about Sabilillah in the cause of God. And the Quran very clearly defines that the cause of God is nothing but is standing up for those who are weak, regardless of their religion, regardless of their gender, regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their culture, whose unspoken words, whose plight and conditions, whether out of war or out of poverty or out of whatever reason, has led them to seek help from someone who can get them out of that situation. And Muharram is a testimony of that historical echoing of this Quranic principle. It is not something that took place between one tribe and the other. Muharram is not the story of Imam Hussein only. It is the culmination of that divine guidance that every generation in human history has followed in one way or the other. Probably we have given tags to individuals without realizing that the superior cause that they were all standing up was nothing but truth and justice, an essential ingredient of faith and a cause of God. And today we begin that series. We'll focus on individuals, and a lot more would be explained by my dear friend Dr. Walji, Dr. Stan Walji, who has been in this series for the last several years. And we are really grateful to the IslamiCity for opening up this new avenue, for this new understanding, this new thinking, because we believe that the divine guidance is a universal guidance, and throughout human history, that divine guidance has walked and has uh, emphasized certain values that are common to all of us. So let us begin with that simple introduction and go to Dr. Aslan Walji, who would first give us a list of the individuals that we want to cover in the next 10 days, including today's, and then we will make sure that we provide you with the basic understanding and basic information so that we could celebrate the heritage. Because one thing we say that one common thing among all these individuals is that they offered their life. And certainly it's a sad event. Life is sacred. But then when we look at it from other perspective, we find it's a more matter of celebration that someone from amongst us, mortal like us, stood up for those principles that would give life and that would open the avenues for life for all of us. And one thing common that you will find among all of them is that life is sacred. But the principles of life, that is truth and justice, are more sacred than the life itself when it comes to make a choice. Over to you, Dr. Hasnan Walji.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Thank you, Dr. Aslam, for those very uplifting words and setting the scene for this year's Muharram commemoration at IslamiCity. I'd like to appreciate Brother Alim and his team for allowing us yet another opportunity to share the values that we normally share and reminding ourselves of the principle for which Imam Hussein gave his life. And this year it is particularly poignant for our series, that it is a tribute to those in the history of humanity who have stood tall in the face of adversity, who have given their lives for the principles of truth, justice, and the betterment of mankind. As Dr. Aslam alluded, inshallah, we will be covering some 10 personalities, some 10 figures in the history of humanity. This cause, standing up for justice, is a universal cause. It does not look at faith, does not look at other values. Justice is a universal value. So inshallah, we'll be covering today Prophet Isaiah, and we'll also look at Socrates. And then tomorrow, we will be looking at Q1 and Rabbi Akiva. We'll also look at Archimedes, Jesus, Joan of Arc, Galileo, Mansur al-Hallaj, Sarmat Kashani, for example, Thomas More, Ruth First, Bhagat Singh, Said Nursi, Mahatma Gandhi, Che Guevara, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and of course, we will end our series with a tribute on the final day to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So that is a lineup that we have for you. The flyer will actually give more details to you. Please tune in every night from today so that we are able to share this. The tragedy of Karbala is a cornerstone of our reflections this Muharram 1446. It's a poignant reminder of the profound impact of the concept of sacrifice. As Dr. Aslam mentioned, the number of verses in the Quran which allude to this. One that comes to mind is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. That never shall you achieve righteousness unless you give something out of that which you love. This is not the time to do tafsir on this particular ayah. Suffice it to say that the operative word here is out of that which you love. And truly, one loves nothing more than one's life. And these are the figures in the history of humanity who have given their sacrifices, their lives for the sake of the truth, for the sake of justice. As we embark on this journey, a word on the title which you have called Witnesses for Humanity. You know, it is essential to shift our perspective on this concept of witnesses. Rather than ourselves or others perceiving witnesses as passive observers, we embrace witnesses as an active, as a powerful verb, not just a noun. To witness is to actually stand for the truth and justice, and to engage in the relentless pursuit of a better world and be a beacon of hope and courage in the face of adversity. And when we talk about the word witnesses, in Arabic, the two terms, shahid and shaheed, come from the same root word, shahada. They both carry deep meanings and they are connected. Shahid generally means a witness, someone who provides testimony, while shaheed refers to a martyr, one who bears witness through their ultimate sacrifice. So to witness in this context is not merely to observe, but to actively stand for truth and justice, and to engage in the relentless pursuit of a better world, and again be a beacon for hope and courage in the face of adversity. So throughout these days, we will be honoring those individuals who, like the heroes of Karbala, sacrificed their lives for the greater good. These are men and women who have faced persecution, who stood up against tyranny, and who have paid the ultimate price to uphold the principles of humanity. Their stories will inspire us. They will remind us that the fight for justice and truth is an ongoing battle that requires our active participation. And as Dr. Assam mentioned so eloquently to say that they stood up for the cause of God, to stand up for the oppressed. This is the bottom line. So, in recounting their sacrifices, we'll explore the profound impact of their actions on humanity. Inshallah, we'll delve into some lessons and the legacy that they leave behind. And each day, we'll bring to light a different story, a different hero whose life and sacrifice have contributed to human history and the betterment of humanity. So let's begin. Tonight, we explore the life and the tragic end of Prophet Isaiah, a name that resonates through history for his profound prophecies and unwavering commitment to the truth. As we know that he lived during the turbulent period of Judah around the 8th century BC, this was an ancient kingdom in what is now southern Israel and the West Bank. The kingdom faced conflicts with neighbors and major empires like the Assyrian, the Babylonian, and Egypt. I guess nothing seems to have changed in that area, sadly. May God protect all those who are suffering in those lands as we see, and it is time that we too continue to raise our voices for the atrocities that are being committed today. To come back to Prophet Isaiah, although he is not mentioned by name in the Quran or the Hadith, and perhaps Dr. Aslam in his response will give us a little bit of an insight into this, but he frequently appears as a prophet in some Muslim sources, such as Qisasul Anbiya and various other tafsirs. Tabari provides some accounts of Islamic traditions regarding Isaiah. He's also mentioned by others like Ibn Kathir and others, and even modern scholars like Muhammad Asad and Abdullah Yusuf Ali as a prophet. So what happened? And this is very brief. It is not an in-depth look at Prophet Isaiah in the time that we have. He lived through two kings. King Hezekiah, who was a just king, but then his son, Masane, ascends the throne and rules for approximately 55 years, making his reign one of the longest in Judah's history. His reign was marked by significant religious and moral decline. He reintroduced idolatry. He brought back pagan practices, promoted various forms of divination, sorcery, and consulted mediums and spirits. He constructed altars for pagan deities within the Temple of Jerusalem. And he also encouraged and engaged in and endorsed child sacrifice associated with the worship of God. It was in this circumstance that Prophet Isaiah delivered God's message of monotheism to the people and their leaders, speaking out against moral and spiritual decay. He spoke out against the moral decay that he saw around him. His words were very clear. He did not mince his words. Indeed, he is famously reported to have said, and I quote, that I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. So true those words are. When we look at those unclean lips that we face on our TV screens every day, a lesson for us to stand up when we hear the people of unclean lips, as Prophet Isaiah taught. His messages were powerful, they were direct, and often, in fact, mostly, uncomfortable for those in power. The prophecies, his prophecies, often foretold doom if people did not repent. And of course, that did not sit well with the rulers. So imagine a society where leaders are accustomed to flattery and false assurances, suddenly confronted by a man who tells them as it is, who tells them that they are leading their people astray, who tells them that they are not following the principle of monotheism, and preaches God's words. It is not hard to see why Isaiah's words were met with such resistance. Sadly, according to the tradition, King Manasseh, a particularly wicked ruler, as we said earlier, ordered Isaiah. Yes, it's hard to even repeat these words. But when we saw the ordeal of what happened to the martyrs in Karbala, it is the same thing to say he ordered Isaiah to be executed by being sawn in half due to his relentless criticism. A body to be sawn in half. This was the murderous way of the king. And his martyrdom, Isaiah's martyrdom, underscores the cost of integrity to be sawn half due to the courage it took to stand up against wrongdoing. So his life and death remind us that speaking out against injustice, as Dr. Ashram said, is necessary, even when the consequences are severe. And Isaiah's legacy challenges us to be courageous and to stand up for what is right. Without further ado, we will go to the next figure in the history of humanity and explore the life and death of Socrates, one of history's most influential philosophers. Known for his profound contribution to philosophy, Socrates' life was marked by an unyielding quest for truth and eventual execution that remains one of the most dramatic moments in ancient Greek history. Born around 470 BC in Athens, unlike many philosophers of his time, it's interesting to note that Socrates did not write any books. We know about his ideas primarily through his students like Plato. What was his philosophical contribution, very briefly? To try and tackle Socrates in a 15-minute, 20-minute session with two other personalities is simply impossible, suffice it to say, that he is known for what is known as a Socratic method. His focus on ethics and virtue and challenging the status quo. What is the Socratic method? Socrates is best known for his technique, which involves asking a series of thought-provoking questions to stimulate critical thinking and uncover deeper truths, meaning that he would train people to question the answers, not just accept the answers. Socrates also believed, in terms of ethics and virtue, that pursuing virtue was the most important task for any individual. He argued that knowledge and virtue are intrinsically linked, and he in fact summed it up in his famous comment. And this is worth putting up on our walls, to say that the unexamined life is not worth living. I repeat, the unexamined life is not worth living. And obviously, with the critical thinking, with the idea of ethics and virtue in a society that was steep in all kinds of injustices and activities that were not virtuous, he was challenging the status quo. He questioned the established norms and beliefs of the Athenian society, engaging in public debates and challenging citizens to think more deeply about justice, morality, and the nature of the good life. Just one anecdote, and I'll pass this back to Dr. Aslam. That one day, one of Socrates' friends visits the Oracle of Delphi, which was the place where wisdom supposedly was being given. And this was through the priestess of Pythia. It's very interesting. I suggest you read up on the Oracle of Delphi and how decisions were being done. Suffice it to say that when his friend went and asked the Oracle of Delphi, the goddess Pythia, that who is anyone wiser than Socrates? And the response was simple: no one is wiser than Socrates. When he heard this, Socrates sought to understand this by questioning those reputed to be wise, meaning politicians, poets of the day. So he goes and found many politicians, interviewed them, talked to them, and found that despite their reputation, they did not truly understand the concept that they talked about. Do you know any politicians like that on our scene today? I'm sure we do. Poets. He discovered that poets often could not explain the meaning behind their own verses, relying on intuition rather than true understanding. And now, the way Socrates analyzed this whole thing is something that's worth thinking about. This is his true legacy. After these encounters, Socrates realized that the oracle statement meant that true wisdom comes from recognizing one's own ignorance. Yes, he said, true wisdom comes from recognizing one's own ignorance. He concluded with his logic, and he said, and I urge you to follow this, that I am wiser than this man, meaning all the people that he had interviewed, that I am wiser than this man. Neither of us probably knows anything worthwhile, but he thinks, meaning the people, the politicians, and the poets, but he thinks he knows something when he does not. Whereas when I do not know, neither do I think I know. So I am likely to be wiser than he to the small extent that I do not think that I know what I do not know. He was alluding to the idea of that compound ignorance, that when one does not know that one does not know, then that leads to compound ignorance because you will never know. And this is what Socrates taught in terms of the humility, that somebody like that, he says, I know what I do not know. And this was his legacy. Finally, to leave this, the trial of Socrates, he was brought to trial, recorded by Plato, that he was accused of corrupting the youth, leading the youth astray by encouraging them to question authority and traditional values. The idea of allowing our young, the upcoming generation, is a valuable lesson for us. That Socrates was not corrupting the youth, but he was teaching them critical thinking so that they could think for themselves, so that they would not have to outsource their akal to somebody else. And then he was also charged with surprisingly impiety because he was accused of introducing new deities and failing to acknowledge the gods that were officially worshipped by the state. He defended himself eloquently, asserting that he had been guided by an inner voice and that his mission was to seek and speak the truth. And this is the stance that despises defense. Socrates was found guilty, sentenced to death by drinking, as is famously known, the poison hemlock, and his execution was carried out. And he spent his final moments discussing the immorality of the soul with his friends and disciples. That, my friends, is a legacy that Socrates' death highlighted, the tension between individual conscience and state authority, and his death or his martyrdom for truth and reason continues to inspire generation of thinkers. Allow me to ask Dr. Aslam to say that we have this comparison between a prophet Isaiah, and a philosopher like Socrates, and looking at the values that Imam Hussein portrayed. Perhaps, Dr. Aslam, in your discourse, you may be able to enlighten us in terms of the comparative values that these three great men stood up for. Over to you, Dr. Aslam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walji, for explaining such a brief time the life stories of two individuals who offered their lives for causes that we have been talking about. That is truth and justice. I find something very interesting in the life of two individuals. One emphasis was on finding the truth and justice. How should we define the truth? And how should we define justice? And in that respect, our own consciousness, our own empirical understanding, and our own logical and critical reasoning would lead us to that path. And the second one is that once you know what truth and justice is, and once you have the conviction, then you stand for that. And if you are genuine, and if you have the guts, then be prepared to fight, be prepared to offer your life for that also. So we find these two values, the quest for truth and justice, and then standing up for justice, embodied in the lives of these two individuals. And certainly this is what the Quran has been talking about. How come you do not stand for in the cause of God? And what is the cause of God? To ensure that the marginalized and weaker people are empowered to make decisions about their lives on their own. That they are no longer the captives of the thinking of other individuals who, based on their own special interests, decide the destiny of others. What other way to celebrate freedom is than to empower individuals, men, women, and children? It's not just a particular class, it's not just a particular people, but to bring all those who are downtrodden, who are neglected, who are marginalized, who have been banished, and who are broken up to a point where they can make decisions on their life. And certainly, the dream of all those individuals, as we would see, have not yet been accomplished entirely in the human history. But this is a noble cause worth standing for. And that is what we are focusing on this particular series, that in what way we as mortal human beings, as weak human beings, as people living in this century, in this 1446 years of Hijrah and then 24 years of uh, uh, Common Era, find some inspiration from those individuals so that we can be instrument of change for those who have been broken and who have been neglected, who have been banished. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم.